D21 Nissan owners, motherfuckers and motherfuckettes. That way I'm giving equal motherfucking love to all you D21 lovers out there. What's going on? Oh my gosh. Holy shit balls. It's freaking hot today. I mean, I'm fucking dying over here. Anyway, see, I'm in perfect weather apparel. All right, I'm trying to get this all in one video. By the time you watch this, I'm going to delete the video right below this one because, well, I fucked up. I talked too much and I was jumping off topic and just been too excited how all this has worked out. Okay, even though I did cause myself some heartache, and not heartache, but headache and pains, you know, thinking pains, but you know what, it's all good. It's all good in the freaking hood. All right, as you well know, this is the old, right? Looks like something you've seen in a Fast and Furious video, right? All right, so that's for sale. Here is the top piece. Once again, 4 bolts on the factory TBI. It's a 2-piece. You have the bottom piece and you have the top piece. The bottom piece is just a giant air meter, okay? And the top piece is what the actual your air cleaner goes to, and this is where I added the elbow, the 4-inch elbow. Okay, there's the air temperature sensor. You would just plug it in your existing plug that comes off the back wall that goes into your existing air plug sensor, your air temperature sensor, okay, to get it correct. There's the clamp, right, nice and clean. I already silicone the gasket on there for you. All you do is just take 4 big bolts off with a nice heavy duty Phillips screwdriver. Make sure it's hard tipped. You don't strip those screws and destroy anything. All right, this is the bag of sensors. Brand new MAF sensor, slightly used TPS sensor, throttle position sensor, and another brand new throttle position sensor, and all the little O-ring seals. Oh yeah, hold on, let me get some of this stuff out of the way as I do this video. All right, boom, just like that. That stuff's gone. Okay, so I'm gonna throw this bag in there, right? These are the brakes for the front brake job that I'll be doing on the Nissan D21 Nissan here pretty soon. These are slotted and drilled, okay? They're ceramic coated, and here are the heart brakes. These are low noise, asbestos free. Asbestos is what makes all that dust and shit. These are ceramic brake pads, high heat, high performance stopping power, okay? Basically, it's a 2-part hub. You take off your caliper bracket, you get that shit out of the way, and then you take the little cap off, or the bearing cover, you take the cotter key out, you pull the whole rotor assembly off, get your big you know, wrench, ratchet, and or an impact, and you impact, or you take off the 6 bolts that bolt the rotor to the hub. Discard that nasty bad boy that overheats and it's too thin and causes warpage and overboiling of the brake fluid. Slap these on, a little bit of maybe Loctite on the bolts, right? And where you can get this is eBay. From R1 Concepts is the name of the store that sells these badass brake discs and pads. I think I got this whole thing kit for 120 bucks. My nephew, it's my nephew's channel, the Jotnar, on his Mazda 3. He bought them from there too, and in that video I have where he's got the duckbill on there, he's got all 4 of them on there already. But the Nissan is drum in the rear. And you know what? I don't really care if it's drum. Drum doesn't wear out as fast, and as long as it's got the proportioning valve set, you ain't got to worry about it. It's not like I'm going 200 miles an hour and braking, trying to brake down to 60 miles an hour. Really, anything, all the weight on these little trucks is in the front. They are pickup trucks, right? So when I've done stupid driving, gone really fast, or, you know, panic braking, especially on the highway, these solid disc brakes, they just don't handle heat well. They heat up the pads, The pads transfer the heat to the pistons and the calipers. Therefore, you start to heat up the fluid. The brake fluid causes boil, goes up to the master cylinder, and then it starts to boil it. Then you start getting the popping feel on your brake pedal, and you're like, oh, that's when the whole shit factor comes in. And hopefully by then you've slowed down enough, or the traffic started moving again, right? Y'all know what I'm talking about. You've been there. All right, let me get these brakes out of the way. All right, now that we got those out of the way, just like that. Holy shit balls, it's freaking hot out here. Yeah, fucking nuts are clinging to my leg. Girls, I don't know how you deal with it, but you know what? You guys are champs when it's real hot outside. But us guys, the bigger the nuts, the longer the stick. All right, don't mean to be nasty there. I'm just joking. You know how my channel is. Here is the TYC aftermarket alternator. I am so disappointed in this. This failed me, right? And I'm going to explain to you where it failed. Oh wait, but first, before I get to that, there is the injector fuel braille and the pressure regulator, right? This is for the 95 Nissan and the Hitachi injectors, right? You need those little rubber seals I gave you in the bag because it just sits right in to the two factory bolts. Sit it on top. As you start to screw it in, it just all sits in perfect, right? Change out those fuel hoses. You know, just put on yourself a new fuel line. I did. I went and put on some new fuel line for my Weber as well. Took off the old shit, put on some new fuel line. Better safe than sorry. Besides, I cut these. Anyway, and for all you didn't know, look it up. Nissan had issues with the first, I think from when they first came out with this intake manifold, I think in 88 or 89 to 94, right? It was EFI and a 2.4 liter KA24E motor, and they had a different fuel braille system. The pressure regulator was mounted in a different area, and it overpressurized the front injector. Okay, so people were having issues with the front injector being overpressurized, going out, flooding the cylinder. And of course, if you have to replace one, you might as well replace them all. That's kind of costly on a, you know, factory defect fuck up. But at least they fixed it. So here's the 95. Never had any issues. This was working the day I turned it off. So that's going with it too, okay? All right. So we got that out of the way. I'm going to do a little project here, but I wanted to get this out of the way and I'll throw it in one video. Okay, mind you, I'm going to start this up, show you the sweet spot of the idle with the AC off and the AC on. Okay, show you how the AC pulls, what the IACV does, that's on your factory carburetor, your TBI, those two solenoid looking things that are bolted to the side of your carburetor that have wires going to them. So like when you turn on your AC, your idle ever so slightly idles up, and all it does, it's an electronic solenoid that activates, piston rod moves inside, it creates a vacuum, not like a vacuum leak, but it lets air suck into the main venturi of the big air meter type lower part of that factory carburetor, and therefore it idles up a little bit. When we turn it off, it goes back down to idle. So if your AC works and you ever did that, notice that, that's what does it. With a carburetor, you just ever so slightly adjust it, maybe the thickness of an Indian woman's hair in her head, and that's the slight difference in the idle adjustment. Okay, now I was very disappointed in the alternator fucking up, and what I'm going to explain this to you is that built into these alternators is a rectifier / regulator. It regulates the voltage output to charge your battery when your battery starts to dip. Okay, now the vehicle doesn't run off your battery, it just uses the battery to start it, etc. Alternator is what keeps everything going. This is a 70 amp alternator. The factory Hitachi alternator is a 60 amp. Now, a 60 amp was great to run the AC, the factory fuel pump, the ignition system, and all the other electrical solenoids and communication devices that communicate to the computer for the EGR system. This solenoid, that solenoid, they all take voltage, certain amount of voltage, 12 volts, and said certain amount of amps. Now, when it's hot, you got the AC on, vehicle's idling. 60 amps is adequate to run this vehicle. It's just a bone stock hard body, right? If you had power windows, right? Maybe a few more power options, you're going to have a 70 or a slightly bigger alternator to suffice those other devices that that require 12 volts and a certain amount of amperage to operate. That's the flow of electrons. When I was taking off this heater hose, right, and I put this one on, I have like 3 or 4 different, I went and got some new ones to replace this eyesore. I took it off right here, right after I put the truck down to do this whole Weber upgrade. And I was trying to cap it off, but I didn't cap it off in time. And it just started leaking out antifreeze. I lost about 1/4 of antifreeze, right? Not half, about 1/8 or 1/4. And it was leaking right into the alternator. Now, I've washed the stock alternator 50 million times, you know. But let's face it, you don't want antifreeze to get on an alternator or a starter, because it's acidic. It can break down. It's you know, it's got silicone based in it, you know. I mean, hell, people swallow it, animals drink it, and they die a horrible death. But so when it leaked all over this alternator, and then by the time I went inside the house, got a big bucket of water and came and doused it off, right, it was already too late. It was dead. Apparently the remanufactured rectifier regulator inside here, all these are remanufactured in China. This is a Hitachi original Nissan alternator casing, but when they take it apart, they replace the electronics, the rectifier, the regulator. So, you know, even when this one went out and I first started the truck up, the truck was running off the battery. And I have a voltage meter right here too, and I was looking at it. It was saying 11.6, right, when it was running 11.7, and it would just fluctuate between a volt. Right, and all it was powering was the fuel pump and the electronic distributor, the ignition system. That's literally all that the battery was supplying. So it was fine. You can drive it for a good amount of miles to a gas station or a shop if you're, you know, you're stuck and you're out in the cold or you didn't make it home. You can pull it over somewhere. You know, alternators, they come and go. So it's better to stick with a factory Hitachi, but I also seen that Denso is another electronic manufacturer that does stuff for Toyota, some of the other manufacturers. Denso is badass, okay? The factory Hitachi is too, because this alternator is about 29 going on 30 years old. This one phased out after a year, and it was doing great, but it didn't give me no telltale signs of it failing. It just went from poof, like that. One thing that they do, they either start to undercharge, or all of a sudden if the regulator pops and it goes out and it can't regulate the voltage and the amps, what'll happen is it'll just start overcharging and all your lights will get real bright. If it's dark, you'll notice it, and you might even hear a whine sound. Better turn your shit off before you blow fuses and relays and start burning up wires, or it just doesn't work. All right, so let me get the alternator out of the way and explain to you what I fixed, what I did, and what I'm going to fix now, okay? And I will start this vehicle up and show you the demonstration and give you the accurate, after a few days of running this, dog shit out of it, highway use, and how much gas it barely sipped, all while doing this, okay? All right, so we're back. So these are the things I've done since then. I've cut off the O2 sensor wire, right? And I cut off the power wire that powered the solenoid for the EGR canister over here that allowed it to open and close, and allow the EGR system to open and close and suck and reburn like the fuel vapors from the gas tank and certain amount of exhaust gases as well. So now all we have is just a nice clean wire loom, right? AC works badass. There's the distributor. There's a distributor wire. You need this wire because you have a crank sensor on here and it's located by the transmission. I have a spare sensor that's not going in the bag because I need that. And the crank sensor senses the position, the crankshaft, in relation to the timing of the distributor. You know, piston 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 3, 4, 2. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, so it tells the distributor where to fire off. Now, I've talked about retarding and advancing a distributor, right? Where you can undo the bolt and you can adjust it and find the sweet spot while you're revving it up, and you can find a sweet spot. Well, it seems that I haven't had to adjust this. So I don't think I'm going to have to go buy an aftermarket vacuum advance distributor where I just wire that in and it has a vacuum advance, you know, because as the higher RPMs go, you want to advance your timing. Basically, you know, start jumping ahead of the spark curve. That way, as you start getting more fuel in there and the RPM starts picking up, you can efficiently burn the air fuel mixture and come in, you know, adequately and cleanly. Now when you're EFI, the computer senses all this and it does it for you. But even on the stock Nissan computer does not advance or retard the distributor. I read up on this just to see what the pros and cons were on the Nissan 95 with the factory EFI. So when they have it set, they have it set. It's the best set position. So if it's not broken, don't fucking fix it, okay? So got rid of those, nice and neat. And I took that extra harness of ground wires, which I shouldn't have done because I had them wrapped around here, right? Well, those ground wires are actually needed. So this is me fucking up and just overthinking. So I took it off, right? And I cut it short and I put the temperature wire for the thermostat reading, right? And I put it in the harness with this, right? So it's just one wire loom and the big old fat ground, right? And it works. And then I come to try to start it and it don't want to start. So those grounds are there for a reason. They're to help. There's like 4 big thick grounds. They're like 14 gauge grounds. They go to the computer and they help ground all the other sensors, the distributor, the electronic distributor, etc. But I got rid of all the other sensors, so I just need that ground for that. So what I did was a quick fix. I got me some wire and I found the 4 wires that I cut, twisted them up, ran a wire straight to the battery. When I turned it on, started right up. And I was like, oh shit. So you see, I caused that problem for myself. So what I'm going to do is, this is what I saved, right? These are the factory ground wires. I just shortened them. There's little eye holes, right? I'm going to twist them up and I'm going to crimp them in a big old heat shrink butt connector, right? And then it's I can shrink it with a lighter. There's no need to come over here with a soldering iron and solder that. It's just ground. It's not like power's going through it. So, and then I will use one of these bolts, right? Nice and cleanly. And I'll probably come all the way over here to this big fat ground from the battery onto the cab, right? And that'll be grounded. That way it'll be a nice, short, thick, sturdy ground. Another thing I did was add the throttle return spring. So that way after time, when the factory spring, gets a little weak, you always have a throttle return spring. That bracket comes with the Weber kit, okay? And it's so you can bolt it anywhere. It's got a little eyelet hole and basically use it to your advantage, right? So when I was not convinced that it was the alternator, what did I do? What I normally do. I take shit apart. So, because I just wasn't convinced that that new alternator was fucking up. I thought it was something in the wires. So from there, all the way down to right there, I dismantled, got a razor blade, cut it all open, found where everything went, found what everything does. Now when you have your alternator, right, originally, you have a little white wire that looks like that, and it comes off and it goes into the alternator. That wire and the one that comes off the plug both go up this brain, right? They go up this brain. One of them goes to this big plug, the big plug, right? That's like a straight plug. They call it a fusible link. If I cut the fuse off, I don't remember. I've done it back in 2019. But if they were there, I cut them off, but I left the disconnects there, right? The other one, the other plug, that is a power wire that these two are always constant. So if you disconnect that one, you'll see your charge light indicator in your dash come on, okay? No shit, it'll come on. So let me tuck that out of the way. I added some 12 gauge wire, soldered it together, you can see the solder, and ran it in 8 gauge round, the 10 gauge round hole, right? Some heat shrink, audio heat shrink for some audio wires to make it nice and neat, and I made them longer. So therefore there's no stress on the wire loom. Now we'll get to this big bastard over here, right? This is the other white one that comes from the plug, right? So if you unplug that while your truck is running and your alternator is good, all of a sudden you're not going to be running off the alternator anymore. You're going to be running off the battery. This one right here has a little yellow wire with red dots and a black line. That is the other wire that comes out of the plug. That is called your battery sense wire. The sensing state wire. It senses the state of the battery. It goes through this whole wire loom, right? Through this plug, goes into the computer, goes through there. It's got a relay and it goes to the fuse holder and relays that's in your dash cluster on the lower left side of your steering wheel. There's no relays for this charging system. It's the two top fuses way on the top right. You have two rows of fuses. It's number 9 and 11. The two top fuses way on the top right. I looked at the charging diagram for this. If you don't know how to read a charging diagram, don't, because it's going to confuse you. You have to understand what ground symbols mean, power, relay symbols. So when I saw that, I'm like, okay, there's no relays. There's two fuses. One is meter and one is engine control. So if it had fusible links up here, I cut them off, but I did leave the quick disconnects. Okay, so that explained that. I put it all back together, right, nice and clean. See, now a while ago I cut that on my Big 4 video that's on my stream where I show the Big 4. I cut that white wire, that factory white wire, off because it was just too small. I added my own big 0 gauge power wire to the terminal. So what's constant all the time? Your alternator is constant and your starter. This is the factory Nissan 2 gauge. That one also goes in the loom. So I just zip tied them all nice and neat. This is the extra 10 gauge ground that goes down there. There's a factory, I believe it's a 12 gauge ground. And then there's the additional big fat 10 gauge ground that I added to the grounding bolt. Okay, because that alternator has to be grounded real good. And there's the factory plug with the factory 2 wires, the yellow wire with the red dots and the black line, the sensing state. And this one right here that goes up to the fusible link. Because if you disconnect, I'll be honest, if you disconnect this one, you're not going to be charging anymore. If you disconnect this one, your truck will turn off. Okay, so I reassembled the whole wire loom nice and neat, tidied it up, used the zip tie, and used the bottom of that throttle return spring bracket to zip it up there. So everything is easy accessible. I even put in the factory plastic bottom engine plate back in to keep hot air from coming up in here and roasting the shit out of the motor. So I already told you, this is how I'm gonna fix the ground for the distributor. So this little patch wire right here works. You see, it works. I'll even start it up to prove to you, it's proof. And then I'll hook up the multimeter for the volt to show you what it's charging at, okay? Show you how that works and what setting to put it on. And these are the tools I will use to strip and crimp said butt connector, okay? All right, I hooked up the multimeter, right? Hook up the ground, power. Come over here. You can buy these at a Harbor Freight. I'm blind, I'm staring into the sun, it's so bright. You can see the battery is at 12.8 volts right now, and the truck's not running, okay? So let me go start it. All right, now I haven't disabled the clutch, the inhibit clutch safety yet. I need to just go under there and close the circuit so I don't have to push in the clutch anymore. That way I could just stick my arm in the window and just turn the key and it'll start. But that's dangerous because all you motherfuckers that don't sit there and wiggle the fucking stick for about a minute or two to make sure it's in neutral, you know, it's like a thing, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, you know, and then, you know it's in neutral. But anyway, don't do that because if you're not experienced, you will forget, you will turn the key and it'll be in gear and the whole truck will lunge forward. And that can be hurtful. I've already been there, done that, so I can do that. So I'm not condoning it, okay? Remember, guys, this is not a race truck. This is a reliable, everyday 95 Nissan with fuel injection, modified to Weber carburation, okay? All right, y'all know it starts because the video that I'm about to delete below this one, y'all have seen it already start. So I turn on the electric fan, okay? This is how it idles. This is the sweet spot, right? Look up the 14.3, 14.2, right? And that's at a low idle. Can you imagine when you're driving? It can't go over 14.4 or 14.5, okay? If it does, the rectifier is starting to go out. So, let me get that off, get this out of the way, okay? And this is how you adjust your idle. Listen, you'll see it turn up. Right there, it's a quarter turn. That's a sweet spot for having the AC. Okay, now I'm gonna turn on the AC and you're gonna hear the click. You're gonna hear it click on, okay? I can do that and hold the phone. Boom. You heard that. Compressor kicked on. The truck isn't dying. I'm at a stoplight. I got my tunes on, listening to the radio, probably scratching my balls or something, or looking at the pretty girl next to me in traffic. Who knows? Whatever. And the AC's on. Now I have the sweet spot of the idle, okay? The truck is not dying. It is spinning the RPM at a certain, it is spinning the alternator at a certain RPM to give it enough voltage and amperage for the compressor to run. Because the compressor, believe it or not, puts resistance on the motor. That's why, you know, they say keep the oil change, the Freon, and keep everything nice and clean, because you don't want your compressor to stop working. And if it starts putting a big drain on your motor, you're going to start wasting a lot of gas. Okay? So let me turn this off. There's the throttle linkage. I put a zip tie right there, so it lines it up to the butterfly mechanism. You see that? I lined up a throttle cable with a zip tie. It lines it up straight to the mechanism. There's a 16-inch eBay cooling fan, regular DC brush, not brushless, mounted in the factory fan shroud. There is no more O2 sensor wire, no more EGR wire, power wires. Just the 2 wires and the coil spark plug wire, nice and clean. Man, I squirted myself in the face. I turned on the windshield wiper squirters. All right. Here's my little switch. That's for my fan. Now I can hook it up to an accessible wire under the ignition, right? Where I turn on my key and it comes on. But you know what? I like being able to turn it off and turn it on when I want to. Especially when it's freaking really cold outside. You don't need the fan to come on while the motor's trying to warm up. For Christ's sake. Crying out loud. So, can you turn the fan off? Alright guys, look. MPGs on this. I just put gas today, and it was, the needle was the thickness of the gas gauge needle thickness, right, of the needle away from the quarter tank. I put gas in it 2 weeks ago already. I've been farting around, dogging the shit out of it, running it around in traffic lights with the AC on, testing it, getting the sweet spot of the idle just right. Have not had to adjust the distributor. Okay, although if you want to go with a vacuum advanced distributor, you can. They sell them on eBay. They're about anywhere from $70 to $90. There's 2 versions. There's one with a resistor, and they work with the 2-part shaft that goes in there, and they're labeled Nissan D21 Navarro. It's a Navarro was another D21 Nissan that was sold, I think, in Australia or Taiwan. It's like a 4x4. It's a 2.4 liter motor. Same type of distributor. Okay. So if you look it up, and there's another one where it's got like a wire harness, and that one you can just wire it up to ground and power. So that way when you turn on the key, it powers it up. And they all have a little donut with a diaphragm in there with one little nipple, so that we can run a vacuum hose to the vacuum port, which is plugged up. But the way this carburetor behaves and breathes, it is exactly equal to the performance of the EFI system before I had electrical issues and blips over there with cuts and stuff, and having to dig out the MAF sensor and the TPS sensor from the brain of ours that comes from the computer. This truck is sold to Texas from Nissan. Right, came off the train, went to a Nissan distributor here where I live. It was sold to an owner, and it's been in Texas ever since. So there's no salt, no rust anywhere in this truck. It's only known Texas heat waves. And let me tell you, Texas heat waves are pretty freaking hot. So you're gonna cook some wires, especially if they're running over like this, and then there's a kink that goes like that to your TPS. So whoever owned it before me probably moved them around a little bit, and there was a broken wire, and it was kind of starting to fail, right? Until I owned it and it started really going bad. But being around 4 cylinders, I kind of just started moving wire looms around. You want to do that before just buying a sensor or a part, because sometimes you can have a broken wire or a bad plug. Thermostat sensing switch can go out too, you know, and that'll cause your idle to go up and down, as mentioned in my EGR delete video. Everything works badass. Okay, the vacuum hose that I created for the power booster, the little brass nipple that I screwed into the accessible, I just took one of the plugs out, keep it, you know, plugged it in there, shoe gooded in, it'll never come out, it's permanent now. So I'm just going to fix this little ground wire issue, make it look nice and neat, tuck everything back up, right? Tuck all this in, nice and neat. Tuck all these away, right? Nice and neat, no stress. Got all my ground situated, and I run that ground to this ground right here. Got some new fuel hose wire. Everything looks good. Kind of looks like the top of a little Honda. But guys, if you really love my channel and you really, you know, are digging this content that I'm putting out here, and I'm really showing you a few things you didn't know or that you weren't being shown, you know, please supply me with a badass logo or sticker, either a Nismo or something that says "suck it," and I'll put it up there, you know. But so I explained how the charging system works, how the Big 4 works, the Big 4, Big 3. Big 4 is grounding your chassis, your cab, the block of your motor, the back of the chassis, and you're actually grounding the actual casting of the alternator. So that's a Big 4. Big 3 is when you actually don't have like a truck that has a frame and a cab sitting on top of it, and you don't run that extra big ground from the cab down to the frame. Okay, so all these things are beneficial in keeping all your factory sensors, everything powered up, juice flowing. You can go through you can go through water bogging situations and not blow out shit, because everything is severely grounded. You don't want, you know, power trying to pull ground off a weak ground somewhere, and then you're going to burn up wires, you're going to burn up relays and fuses, etc. Okay, so this is the setup. I know it's a long video, but I think I explained everything a little bit better. The Plenum effect that I created here, see, it sweats, it's cold. I touch it and it's cold, it's cool. So the factory plate is 1/2 inch thick. This is a little over 1 inch. This is a little over 1 inch. So that's 2.5 inches plus the gaskets. A little over 2.5 inches of Plenum effect. So that's a lot of severe sucking. That's why it starts right away. This is a bowl vent that just basically goes into the top of the bowl and it vents. Okay. I don't have no more over pressurizing the fuel tank. No more psh when I open the cap, because the tank vents now. Where do I rate this on MPGs with miles per gallon? Well, I'm going to say a 40 to 50% gain over MPGs, because from what it was doing, the way it was acting with fuel MPGs and not burning anything up, etc., it was horrible. Now the carburetor meters all the fuel. It does the explosion there and it goes in. So when you have fuel injection, fuel injection is powerful for one reason, because it's direct ported fuel injection. Then you get the big air meter, the factory air meter. Air comes in, it rushes as the fuel is spraying, hits the top of the valve stem and the top of the valve, right? The valve opens up, poof, you got that instantaneous spray, right? Carburetors make power in a slightly different way. That's why creating a high Plenum, keeping the air intake moisture nice and cold and cool, just like a cold air intake for EFI, helps the explosion a lot more efficient and work better. Okay, so this works. And I need to just go one size down on my air correctors. I'm running just a little lean, which means like when I'm rolling off the throttle, first gear, it's getting a little bit too much air, and it could be a little bit smoother. And by the time I start rolling a little bit, more fuel is starting to spray as the motor starts to spin more, creating more vacuum. Then the run circuits start to activate, and it's fine. It just blasts off. I mean, I've already lit up the tires, done some fishtails, dogged it through the gears. It doesn't bog on me, but I can go down on the air correctors. So that's like a lean mixture. And how do you fix that on EFI? Well, you got to go on the computer, plug it in, and you got to correct the AFR, air fuel ratio. I can get an AFR, a manual one, plug it in like right here somewhere. Take this one out, plug it in. It's 2 wires, runs into a little gauge on the inside, and it gives me my air fuel ratios. And then I can really dial it in and just take it with a grain of salt, because you're never going to get it perfect. Just like stock EFI is never perfect until you start upgrading it, but it works flawlessly. It's badass. So does carburation. So what can you take from this? If it's not broken, don't fix it. If you're not used to doing something like this, you don't have the experience, don't attempt it. I did this by myself here in this parking lot. I've got more subscribers now because people need help with their vehicle, like 1 or 2 people, and I'm teaching them tech tips. So this is how I get paid. I make money off my YouTube channel. This pays for my rent, and people probably think I'm crazy talking to a phone, making videos, but this is how YouTube works. You put the information out there, the content, and it helps you. I'm giving back to the community because people need to go to work. They need to feed their families. They need to learn how to work on their shit, and they didn't know, and not get screwed over by the middleman who's charging them $1,000 to $2,000 when it's really just an air cleaner or a bad plug. You know how it goes. All right. Peace. Love y'all.